All right. So, this is Josh Mancell, everybody.
Hi.
Hey.
How's it going?
All right. So, I guess we'll start things off with you might recognize his music from games such as Crash Bandicoot, Jack and Daxter. He's done maybe a show you guys might remember too, Clifford the Big Red Dog.
You
All right.
guys all grew up. What happened? You're making me feel old.
All right. So, can you tell us a bit about your musical background?
Well, let's see. I started off playing piano when I was about 8 years old, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then it was actually my mom who suggested that I started playing drums to help me with my rhythm. And because my elementary school offered an instrument, it was available to me, so I added drums to the mix when I was about 11 or so. And then once I got my first drum set, which is still the one I still use today, 20 years later, being a teenage boy kicked in, and I sort of let piano go at about age 14 because it was much cooler to be, behind the drum kit, pretending to be a rock star or whatever. And then I slowly came back to piano once I got into college and started writing music. I found it was like obviously the best place to compose as a one-person unit. And then actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. My brother taught me how to play the basics of guitar when I was about 17 or 18, so I've continued to, I have a bunch of guitars, and whatever I'm not good enough to perform, I'll hire someone, to dress it up or whatever. But so I sort of get around on keyboards and guitar, but drums is like my main axe.
All right. Who are some people or groups that have influenced your music?
Well, I'll say that, the music that I write is really project-based, and I don't really see myself as having a particular area that I'm better at than another. I listen to a lot of music, and I listen to a lot of film scores, but it's really like the project itself that dictates what the style or genre or instruments. I try to create these sound worlds that really tie into storylines, and especially with the video game music, it's, what's going to help reinforce the atmosphere that you're in a particular game. And the Crash is, a good example of that. It's like I really tried to like weave in the sounds to be almost seamless from like what you were experiencing as a player. So I grew up listening to all kinds of, pop music, and I was a big Devo fan, which ultimately led to me working for Mark Mothersbaugh. But I grew up listening to classic rock, and my dad was very into jazz and Latin jazz, and my mom was very into soul and blues. So, I kind of felt like it was coming at me from all angles. And once I started collecting records, then I was just sort of like, okay, now I'm like really in control of what I listen to, and I got into punk rock and ska and, metal and, just anything that sounded good to me, I just ate it up. So I never, I'm looking at about 4,000 records right now that you can't see because it's off camera. But, it's like, I feel like I'm influenced by everything that I absorb in some ways. I do like a lot of film composers because they, too, kind of have to be chameleons. Like Jared Goldsmith, like, you could listen to like Planet of the Apes or Chinatown, and like, you can still tell it's him. He puts his stamp on everything that he does, and it's also like perfect for each movie too. So he's kind of one of my heroes as far as composers go. I also like composers that can do a lot with a little bit. Mark Mothersbaugh was definitely a key influence in like, okay, you have 5 or 6 instruments to make something really special and really effective. How can you do it? So I know that with lower budget things, you don't necessarily have the budget for a big, 100-piece orchestra. So like, how do you make something compelling with, a hand percussion and a vibraphone and, a crappy guitar? So does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. definitely.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Is there any particular medium of entertainment, whether that's film, television, commercials, video games, that you enjoy composing for, perhaps the most?
Well, I'd say each one kind of has its own set of pros and cons. I mean, with television, it's like a fast turnaround, so like the schedule is always sort of locked in. There's no wishy-washiness, but it can also be kind of a grind. The good thing about TV is that you do make royalties on it. So the Clifford thing was definitely like a gift from the heavens. As far as like having music running on TV every day for I don't know how long it's been on, 12 or 13 years, something like that. So that's nice. I do film is great because generally like your subject matter is a little more sophisticated, or it can be, and you can really lock into a process with the director, which is kind of like. I mean, if I had to choose one, it would probably be working on films because you can really get into a creative process. I mean, I've done several films with this director, Renji Phillip, and we're getting ready to start another project. And he's someone that I've known for a long time, and we've been friends, and we really go into the woods with this thing. He's also a drummer and a musician too, so we can really like collaborate, and it's really awesome. We did this movie called Cheesecake Casserole, which pretty much went straight to digital. Couple of years ago, and we had a great time with it. It seemed like working on it was like 99% just fun. And then with the game thing, that was nice because I felt like I could write music that was really served more of an upfront function, whereas like with TV and film scoring, I feel like you can't really notice it too much. It really has to just be more subliminal and tied into the story, and it has to be very nuanced. But with the video game stuff, it was an opportunity to really just sort of like go crazy and like have music drive action and mood, and like there was not a lot of like restriction as far as like how subtle it had to be. I mean, there were some subtle moments in the first Crash game where it was very atmospheric, but it's still like a big part of the overall picture. So, and then commercials, I don't really love working on commercials. I mean, I did a lot when I was working at Mark's Place, but I don't really enjoy. It seems like the process now has been kind of eliminated, and it's less of a creative process and more like middle management. Looking for something that sounds like something else, and like it's just very much like a cattle call. Like you submit 100 tracks, and maybe they'll land on something that sounds exactly right in that particular moment, but then someone on the top shelf will step in and say like, no, this doesn't sound enough like We Are Young or whatever the reference is. So commercials, they can be good for like if you have a personal relationship and you sort of, if it's an easier path, but for the most part, I feel like commercials are kind of frustrating. So.
All right. Let's see. Well, you were mentioning working with Mark. Could you give us some details about Mitata Musica and how you became part of it?
Well, when I was in college, I started writing music, I guess my sophomore year, and I had a teacher named Meyer Kupferman at Sarah Lawrence College who he was a kind of an old school New York concert composer, but he had also spent a few years in Hollywood and scored a couple movies, and that was part of his curriculum was a film scoring class. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And Sarah Lawrence also had a film program, so I thought that there'd be a little bit more kind of cross-disciplinary, I might get to score some student films, and I did a little bit, but it wasn't quite as fruitful as I hoped. But I stuck with it, and just a lot of things kind of coalesced in my senior year. My best friend from Michigan had been going to school at UC Santa Barbara and had gotten into screenwriting, and we had talked about, moving to LA after college, and it was a combination of that and my professor Meyer saying like, yeah, you should go out there and give it a go. So the spring break before I graduated, I sort of made up a list of brothers and uncles and relatives of my classmates that were in the business. So I went to LA by myself on my spring break, and I rented a car, And I basically just like sat down with anyone who would spend time with me, and I had lunch with a couple directors, and I stayed with a PA on a film, and I got the phone number of an executive producer who Mark was scoring a show for him called Man and Machine, which also coincidentally starred one of my ex-classmates. And of course, I just had to jump at the chance of meeting Mark. So I basically just got his phone number and called him up. He answered the phone. He said, "Yeah, come on, I'm here all week. Just give me a little heads up." And so that's how it started. I just literally just drove to his house, which is where he was working from, and I spent an afternoon with him and watched him do a session, and it was kind of crazy. And he just was like, "Well, keep in touch." And so I was like, "Okay, sure, I'll keep in touch." So I moved out to LA, and I called him. "Hey, it's good to hear from you. Yeah, keep in touch." I was like, "All right, I guess this is how it happens. I just have to be a little bit persistent." And I guess it was the second or third time I called him just to say hi. He was like, "Oh my God, I was looking for your number. I couldn't find your number. I just fired my assistant 2 days ago. Do you want to come work for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll come work for you." So how it started. And, working there in the afternoons, and I was like, there was only 4 people there. It was Mark and Bob Casali, who's also Devo Guy, was the engineer, and a receptionist. And it was just the 4 of us working out of his house for, I guess, the first 3 years. And then he moved down to Sunset Boulevard, and the company slowly expanded. And I worked there for almost 15 years. So it was kind of an amazing experience.
All right. Let's see. Well, now that we're getting into your involvement with Mutado, would you like to tell us about the process of what it was like for receiving the position as the composer for Crash Bandicoot?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it wasn't done with a whole lot of fanfare, really. It was. Mark was doing a lot of television work at the time, and so I kind of got my start just working on various kids' TV shows, and I would split episodes. I mean, it was all sort of on the level. It wasn't really ghostwriting. Mark was sort of known to have, people in-house helping out, including his brother, Bob Mothersbaugh, who wrote most of the music for Rugrats. So I got my start actually writing music. I started off doing sound effects for commercials. That's kind of how I transitioned from being like a studio intern to being like sort of a more hands-on contributor. So I worked on some kids' TV. I worked on a Disney show called Adventures in Wonderland and in Beakman's World. I did a few, 6 episodes of that. So I kind of proved myself to be reliable and, enough talent juice to, make networks happy or whatever. And then I worked on this, a game came to, this Propaganda Films called up and said, "Hey, we're doing a game tie-in to Johnny Mnemonic. Do you want to work on that?" And of course, Mark was just like, "Well, I'm scoring, 10 TV shows." So I was, literally right in front of him, and he was like, "Hey, you want to work on a game?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I really didn't know what that meant at that point. I thought well, it's going to be something like Mario Brothers or something. But it turned out to be this epic interactive movie. I mean, it was all shot on film. It's filmed characters, 2 hours of footage. It was a crazy amount of work. I worked with another guy on it, and we did I did all the music. We did all the sound effects. We did Foley. We created room tones. We even had to record dialogue. It was just this epic job. And once I did that, I sort of earned the title of well, he has the chops to be the game guy here. And then I think sometime in the year following, we got a call from Universal Interactive saying, "Oh, we have this new game. Do you want a demo for it, or do you want to work with it?" And it's basically all under Mark's name. That's why I share credit with him, because obviously he was the face of the company, and it was they came to him. But like I said, because I was sort of the unofficial game guy, I got pulled along to it, and I just quickly wrote, I think, 4 pieces, and they liked them, and they were like, "Great." So that was kind of how it started, and they always knew that I was the guy writing the music, and I had a good relationship with Dave Baggett. I'm still very close friends with him, and I just finished doing a project with him this year, and that's how it started. It was just very organic.
All right. And For the music for Crash, could you give us some details about how it became implemented?
You mean technically speaking?
Yeah, like the MIDI and everything inside the game.
Well, I mean, in the very beginning on Crash 1, they sort of had in their head that I was going to be the programmer as well. And it was like, like I mean, I was only like 26 years old, so I was like, oh, okay, and I remember like one of their tech guys coming over and like installing this like Sony Sound Tools thing in my my Mac Quadra or whatever. It's just like, it's ridiculous to talk about now because it's like so ancient, and I remember they gave me this like top secret manual, and I just looked at it, and Mark and I were just like, no, this is like out of the contract. We're not doing any programming for you guys. So basically it got, scaled back to what it should have been all along, which is basically I wrote all the music. It's all, for the most part, it's all MIDI, and whatever live instruments you hear are basically just live samples that I would trigger using a Roland sampler. And I would bounce everything out as a general MIDI file. And what was kind of interesting about Crash at the time was I could use my own sounds. That I wouldn't have to like use a general MIDI palette, which is sort of like, it was kind of the norm, I guess, in the mid 90s. Maybe a little bit preceding streaming audio. So I would bounce out general MIDI files, and then I would provide the programmers with a one-note sample of each instrument and each piece of music. Now, the fact that it was a one-note sample was kind of limiting because, if you're just using one note as your source, as you go up the keyboard and down the keyboard, it degrades in quality and starts sounding less and less like the original instrument. And that's mainly why all of these pre-console mixes that I've posted on SoundCloud and whatnot sound considerably different, is because they're multi-samples and I'm using, my effects, and everything is full res, whereas like the game versions are very much, even once I gave them the one-note samples, each sound had to be down-sampled into something that could fit into this minuscule sound memory. And I mean, we have like 3K timpani. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I literally had to sit. And the cool thing that, I mean, the first game soundtrack doesn't sound very good, and it's a lot. I mean, I'm just kind of going on a tangent here, but everything had to be knocked down, kind of like in a standard way. It's like, okay, 44K is full res, and then you just chop it in half from there. So, there's a lot of 11K sounds in there. And then with the second game, I think it was Dave Baggett actually came up with this tool that was able to knock things down to like like a more specific sample rate. So we could, things that would hold up better on a very low sample rate, we could use, it could be like a 3K or a 3.5K. It was like we could really dial in, and that way we could be a lot more effective with the memory, and allocate. If I had like a sustained note, which is basically like a second or a second and a half, we could like a lot of the didgeridoo samples and things that would like have a little more sustain on them, we could allocate the memory accordingly. And that's the way we did all of the Naughty Dog games up until Jak 3, and that was the only game that was streaming audio. So it was challenging, to say the least.
All right. And then transitioning into Jak and Daxter, what led to Naughty Dog asking you to be continuing to compose for their games, such as Jak and Daxter?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with that I was already sort of in the mix there, and already had, a relationship with everyone there. I mean, when I first started Crash 1, I think it was only like 10 or 12 people, so it was kind of like this. It was actually just slightly bigger than the Mutato team, so it just kind of felt very natural that I would slip into that. I mean, I think we had a 3-game contract for the Crash, and then Crash Team Racing was like its own contract because it wasn't really a part of the original trilogy. And then they were already working on Jack and Daxter when I was finishing up Crash Team Racing, so there was a little bit of overlap in terms of like, okay, this is our new project we're working on. They pulled me in conceptually fairly early. I remember they gave me this big binder called Project Y, which is the name of Jack and Daxter before it actually became Jack and Daxter. I don't think I even remember. I think it was called Project Y up until the release date, or at least that's what I called it. All of my files are like PY this and PY that. So it was just sort of like a seamless transition, and I guess I was doing Clifford in the middle of that, so there must have been some space in between there. But I remember it was like, okay, here's the new game, or the new franchise, really. I think they had already signed on to do, multiple Jack and Daxter games. So it was really just sort of a natural transition. I don't think there was ever any other people that were being considered, so.
All right, and Jack and Daxter had very interactive music.
Yeah.
Could you give us some details about what it was like composing interactive music?
It was a pain in the ass. Pretty much. No, it made sense because, it was less of like a level-based thing, and they were trying to create like kind of a seamless environment where they were trying to eke their way out of the platform format to varying degrees of success. And so they wanted in Jack 1 to have like sort of like an instrument to indicate that you were in this part of the environment, and it would just be like a simple like sound effect or a single instrument that would like, I guess that only happened on the main jungle village level. I can't really remember, but I think that's the one where like if you go to see the fisherman or whatever, then like the little accordion starts playing. And it was really on Jack 2 where we tried to make it interactive with like, okay, if he's on his little like hoverboard, then this little thing comes on, and if he's going to use a weapon, then this thing comes on, and if you're in this environment, and it became very complicated because the actual bed of music had to be so simple memory-wise, because I was still dealing with the graphics were like pretty much eating up all of the game memory for this game, and it is. I mean, at the time, it was like kind of mind-blowing, like what they were able to pull off. But it was always kind of a fight to get more memory for the soundtracks. And I don't mean like a fist fight. I mean, it's just kind of like, okay, well, if you want it to sound like more epic and more of this kind of expansive, atmospheric or whatever, then I just simply needed more memory to work with because, the Crash games are so like percussive and kind of cartoony that it kind of lent itself to having very short samples. But, for the Jack games, it was always kind of a struggle to like have enough sound memory to create something that was a little more lush and a little more like sophisticated. And that was especially the case. Jack 2 was very frustrating. Like I can barely listen to that music because I remember it being such a struggle to like make things sound interesting, and I barely listened to the game versions of that music when it came out because I just felt like it was such a mess. And then of course Jack 3, everyone like realized, okay, well now we can stream audio, so make it epic and blah blah blah, and that's what I tried to do. So I really like the Jack 3 music just because I felt like finally the shackles had been cast off and I could like use my own reverb and like have orchestral samples that lasted more than a second and so forth. So yeah, the internet. I actually I was given an opportunity to write a little article for Game Developer magazine about the Jack 2 soundtrack, and it's like I just picked up the magazine the other day and I reread it, and of course it's like 12 years old, so it's all ancient technology, but I'm actually shocked at how like positive sounding I am. Because I remember just like writing, being like, I fucking hate this. Like, God, that's what so, losing my mind over it. But anyway.
All right.
Secrets revealed.
Yeah. And then going back to television, what was it like becoming part of Clifford?
Well, I guess it's sort of started off just like any other project that you taught of. Mark gets a call, and if you're within eyeshot or earshot, then, you might have an opportunity to work on it. And I remember I don't know what I was working on, like a commercial or something, and he was just like, "Oh, we just got a call from Scholastic, and they're looking for music for this show about a dog." And I'm like, "Oh, what's the show?" And he's like, "Oh, Clinton." And I'm just like, "What?" Clifford, the big dog or something. And he's like, "Oh, Clifford the big red dog." He's like, "How do you know about this?" It's like, people, like, I grew up, having my elementary school teachers read this stuff to me. And he's like, "Oh, so you want to do some demos for it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And he was like, "Well, they want stuff by the end of the day." Oh, okay. And I remember we had just done a bunch of demos for like a telephone company commercial, and they all got rejected. So I had this like kind of fresh pile of rejects, and I remember I think I had time to work on like 2 of them, and one of them was like the basic track for the Clifford theme song, just that little kalimba hook and like the drum beat and like the little guitar melody, and I put it on a DAT or whatever the hell I was doing back then, and just sort of threw it out. I mean, I remember like thinking like, "Oh, this could be really good. Like I'm getting an opportunity to demo for a TV show. If it's PBS, then they tend to show their they run their shows for a long time." So I kind of, in some ways, kept my eyes on the prize, saying like, "Okay, this might turn into something, like a Sesame Street where it runs for a very long time." And so I submitted some stuff and didn't hear back for a long time, as it always is. And then I guess it was maybe like a month later or something like that. Mark was just like, "Hey, they really like one of your pieces." And I'm like, "Who?" And they're like, "Scholastic." And I was like, "Oh, no way, really?" So it was then up to us to come up with like turn it into a theme song, basically. So I remember they faxed us some lyrics or lyric ideas, and then Mark sort of shaped it into like a coherent. I remember the reference like we want to tell the story of Clifford like Gilligan's Island or the Brady Bunch. Like that was like their kind of thing. So we want to tell like the basic story of it through the lyrics. Here are the key points to hit. And so Mark sort of shaped it into this little thing that would last 60 seconds. And then he just like went into the studio and just sort of belted it out, and we, sent it off, and they were like, "Awesome, you got the job." So I was like, "Oh, no way." And so, but it's funny because like after that, they really fell in love with Mark's vocals, even though it was like really like kind of rough and off the cuff. But they loved that part of it. But it was too rough and too off the cuff for the actual theme song. So we went through 12 singers to get to Jason Michael, who was a friend of mine who ended up doing the final version. So that was kind of maddening too, because at every point that they rejected someone, I felt like, well, they're just going to fire us, I got into worst case scenario mode, but lucky 12, my favorite number. Jason totally nailed it, and and then that led to the series, which was like its own set of challenges. But they liked the theme song, so I figured like, okay, well, as long as I kind of stick to that instrument palette and that kind of vibe, like just super. I mean, it's for preschool kids. I don't think there's a single minor chord on that whole show because it was just too sad. It's too sad. Anyway.
All right. And how would you describe the transition from working with Mark at Mutato to becoming freelance?
Well, I mean, obviously having to hustle for your own work is a paradigm shift. I'm not a famous rock star, so it's, when Mark started transitioning from his Devo stuff into being a composer, it was, fairly easy transition for him just because he already had a name for himself and obviously a lot of relationships. His relationship with Paul Rubens and the Pee-wee's Playhouse thing was like kind of a golden opportunity. That show won Emmys, and just right out of the gate, he was like, "Oh, I'm an established children's television composer." So for me, it's all kind of based on personal relationships, and with the exception of this last thing that I was working on, this app game. That's the first time someone's ever come to me because of who I am and what I've delivered over the years and wanted to work with me. These are people from Australia. I've never met these people. And basically, the guy who created the game is a Crash Bandicoot kid who's grown up. And so I'm like, oh, wow. that's what it's like to be, sought out. But everything else I've done in my freelance has been based on, previously existing personal relationships. So it's tough. It's super competitive, and there's like a million composers out here and out there and everywhere, and you don't have to be in LA to be, a successful composer anymore. It's like everybody can just, sort of, send their music on the internet, and so it's rough.
All right. Well, I think it's about time we could open it up to anybody else who wants to ask them some questions. Chris. Let me put this in.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey!
So just curious, are there any lessons you've had to learn maybe the hard way that you wouldn't mind sharing, or any nuggets, some fresh kids trying to get into the industry that you can share with us?
You're talking about like once you have the job or getting the job?
Either way, just in the industry in general, business stuff, or what you're saying too, getting the job and keeping it.
Well, like I said, it really is personal relationships. So it's like if you're able to like put yourself in a place where you're meeting, creators of content, that's really the best place to go. And I think that because music is a very specific thing in the universe, that people who are not musicians and are creating content that requires music, they're looking for something it's not just talent. They want to be able to work with someone and feel at ease with someone and feel like they can sort of stumble through things and stumble through the process. So, I mean, obviously the most natural byproduct of that would be like a friendship. And I feel like those have been always my most successful and positive work experiences, has been working with people that I know outside of the project. So, I mean, the thing that no one really told me, the other thing is that like I landed into this Mutado gig where for a long time I just didn't have to hustle for work, and it was always under Mark's umbrella, and that was a beautiful thing because the guy was super busy and I had a lot of opportunities. But at that time, I was so busy that I was not really interfacing with a lot of my peers, which I wish that I had, as far as like just being a young person who's out in the world circulating. It's like I wish that I had like sort of like, maybe shook a few more hands and made a few more friends of the directors and producers and writers and editors and all the people that you come into contact with when you're on a project. So that would be, I think, a solid piece of advice is just, if you're interested in like working in films or television or games, then like go out and like just meet a bunch of those people and go out for drinks with them. I'm not talking about being, cheesy, schmoozy. Just, find people that you like, find friends who have a similar interest and just like sort of build these organic relationships, because when it comes time to really do the work, it's like you need to kind of fall back on that sort of comfort zone of just being comfortable with people.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
So I kind of missed the first half of the interview, so I don't know if you covered this, but I was talking to Chase yesterday night, and he told me that you were trying to push for, or somebody was trying to push for an HD remake of Crash Bandicoot, right?
Well, the soundtrack.
Or at least the soundtrack. I don't know, like, he showed me the original soundtrack that you made compared to the version that was sampled down, right?
Yeah.
Sampled down onto the CD. But since it was back in the 90s that you composed that, right?
Yeah.
Did you have any synchronization licenses when you composed it back then?
It was all work for hire. So basically that means that, I don't really own any of it, but I also, I'm a little unclear as to like what the legality is, because I know that whoever, I think it's Activision at this point, owns all that stuff. I mean, the ownership has changed hands so much, and I literally like just, I don't think about Crash Bandicoot as far as like where and after Naughty Dog. I mean, people ask me all these questions about like, you know, these other games that I didn't work on. I'm like, I don't know. But I feel okay about, you know, posting all these pre-console versions because technically they're not the game versions. I mean, I had to recreate all of the game versions with another Naughty Dog employee to make them sound as much like what I've been posting. So it's a little bit of a legal nightmare as far as like untangling like what it would take to release the soundtracks officially. And I've talked about it with Mark, and he's totally willing to, I mean, because I share credit on all that stuff, and it was all done through his agent, so, you know, there's ultimately like a giant lifeline to Mikado and Mark as far as releasing the stuff officially. And he's on board with it, but neither one of us are really willing to pay for the lawyers to work it out. I keep on sort of passively hoping that like one of those video game labels or someone's going to like call me and say like, hey, we want to do this, you know, can you provide us with, you know, the high-res files? And I'd be like, sure, you know, as long as it all adds up to something that's, you know, reasonable.
Okay.
So does that make any sense?
No, it makes total sense. But then, so what do you do for your licenses for any soundtrack that you make nowadays? Do you actually own it, or do you sell all the rights to the developers of the actual game?
It depends on what people are willing to do. I mean, with like a lot of independent films, what I'll usually do is I'll license things exclusively for like kind of like the shelf life of an independent film, which is usually like a year or two. I generally haven't reused stuff that I own for other projects just because I really try to like make the music to really be specific to that project. But there are situations where, especially with like source music, like if I'm like there's, you know, a project where I have to like do a sound alike of like a band or whatever, and then I'll just license it to them because who knows, maybe a commercial will want to, you know, use it. So when possible, I mean, I think, you know, independent production companies and lower budget things are a lot more willing to do a licensing thing, and I would say like always push for that if you can, because it's better to like own your music than not own your music, obviously. But I think actually with the Totomi game that I just finished, I remember we sort of like tried to negotiate a licensing thing, and they wanted to like own it, so that, you know, that dictated like what the fee was and blah blah blah.
Yeah, froze.
Freeze?
Yeah.
Your worship.
There it is.
Oh, okay.
Could you repeat maybe like the last sentence there for us, because it froze for a second?
I guess you know, like whenever possible, I think it's best to try to retain, you know, your publishing. And remember, no one can ever take your writers away. That's totally like bullshit, basically. You know, when a film or a television company wants to, you know, say that they own the actual melodies and whatnot, you know, don't ever do that.
Okay.
I remember there was a big thing with Saban where they were basically just like taking everyone's writers' royalties, and there was a big class action suit, and like, yeah, it's just, you know, so remember, your writers' royalties are your own always, and publishing is what you're negotiating, the actual recorded versions of your music.
All right. Thanks.
Sure.
All right.
Hey Josh, thanks for Skyping with us.
Hey, this is fun.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of people here are like super excited to like listen to you talk. It's been awesome. So question. So based on the work that you've got to do with the relationships you've established with Mark, with the people at Naughty Dog, with the work that you're doing now, in a hypothetical situation, if you needed to say hire someone to assist you or intern with you, one of the things that Berklee really tries to do with their students is try and find them positions where they can intern with an established composer, where they could help out and whatnot. If you were to do that, what are the technical and maybe even social qualities that you would look for in a person who would assist you?
Well, I'll say first that I would need a lot more work to hire someone to help me. That's just the plain truth of it. I mean, I've had people approach me about like, oh, I want to be your intern. I'm just like, all right, you want to like fold my socks for me? I'm not really like. I mean, I hope to like. I mean, whatever. I'm totally crapping on myself at this point, but I mean, I use Digital Performer. That's my main workhorse. I have Pro Tools, but I don't really use it because I don't really love the way it handles MIDI.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the audio that I get out of Digital Performer is, it's 24 bit. It's I can go as high as I want, and it's fine. So I do use Digital Performer. And then everything else that I use technically is really pretty straightforward. I'm not much of a gearhead. I have like a handful of software synths, and I have like a couple hard drives with a lot of the samples that I used back in Mutato. So when you listen to this Totomi music, I've already had like a comment saying like, "Oh, this reminds me of Crash." It's like, well, it's because I used that exact same sound, 18 years ago or whatever. And I just, I try to have my peers listen to it and tell me if it sounds stupid or dated or whatever. But I tend to like the sounds that I use. And I've always been like kind of a hybrid. Like even when I was doing just like MIDI boxes stuff, my orchestral stuff is like straight up hybrid of like, different sample libraries. And on this last project, I have like a live viola and a live violin blended with all this stuff. So hopefully it never sounds like a preset sound. But what I'm saying is that like as far as like my technical stuff goes, I'm pretty straightforward. Like I have a few hard drives and a few software synths, and a mic ready to record whatever live instrument I can get my hands on just to make it my own.
Awesome.
So now, as far as personality goes, I have no idea. I mean, I've been so used. Even when I was at Mutato, I wasn't really truly collaborating with a lot of people. I was pretty much. My stuff was my own. I mean, I did do a fair amount of work with Bob Mothersbaugh. We worked on some commercials together, and we did some TV stuff together. But I don't know if I'd ever feel comfortable like farming out work, unless I, by the grace of God or goddesses, I had 10 TV shows to work on or whatever. So I guess I don't really have a proper answer to that. So
No, still okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cat.
Hey. So I'm a really big fan of the Crash Bandicoot music, and I had a question, especially in the third game and Crash Team Racing. There's a lot of kind of foreign music, I guess, in a way, like a lot of foreign levels, like the Egyptian level and the there's like a Mayan level. I think I remember.
Yeah.
I was wondering, did you have to do any like prior research to any of those styles, or did you just kind of like write what sounded Egyptian or what sounded kind of like that? What you thought that style was?
It's kind of bogus, but I remember for the Arabian stuff, I really like that kind of music. So I definitely like. I think that's like the only piece of Crash music that isn't in 4/4. I think it's like in 10/4 or something like that. 10/8. I can't remember. But I remember like listening to a lot of that stuff and saying like, what, I really want this to sound like pretty legit. I mean, obviously I'm a white guy from Michigan, so I can't be much flavor in my ethnicity. But yeah, and as far as the instruments that you hear, I mean, like the one where the Coco is riding the little tiger, like the Chinese music. I mean, those are all like Chinese. They're sampled Chinese instruments. The music itself, it's kitschy, and I would be really embarrassed if like a Chinese person heard it and like told me I was like a culture vulture or something. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny. And actually, it's funny with the Jack and Daxter music. Like that wasn't really tied to anything real, and the actual concept for the Jack and Daxter music was to make it sound like world music from another world. Okay. So it was kind of anything goes. And there's like an instrument, this Balinese tuned gong thing that I use on everything. I mean, it's like on almost all of my film scores. You can hear it on the early Clifford episodes. It's in all the. It's like even in the. I haven't posted this one, but there's like an action piece from Totomi, and like the melodies played on this thing, and like it's not my instrument. It's a sample from some dumb sample CD from 1997, but I love it. It's like and it's like I don't know. It's like Balinese, but to me it just is kind of like an all-encompassing good melody instrument. So, you know, I wouldn't say any of that stuff is pure. I think the Arabic one was the one where I tried my best to have it. I like the way it sounds now. It's like, you know, I could picture it being performed live.
Cool. All right, thanks.
Sure.
All right, you got anybody else to ask some questions?
One
All
more
right.
quick one.
Okay.
Actually, a super quick one. Hey Josh, so sorry, just another quick question. So about your
Sure.
game Tatomi, when can we hear a little more about it, whether the soundtrack or the game coming out?
For this recent thing,
Yeah.
well, I just posted the main theme last night. So if you go to my SoundCloud page, you can hear the main theme from Tatomi. And the game itself is not coming out until, they'd say, like, holiday time this year. So I guess there's only 3 pieces of music in this game, by the way. It's an app game, and there's a main theme for the screen, and then there's 2 pieces that play. I think they just sort of rotate. One's more of an action piece, and the other one's kind of a mystery piece, and they're about as long as a Crash piece. They're about 1:20 each.
Mhm.
So eventually I'll have them all up on my SoundCloud, and definitely when the game comes out, all 3 will be up. So as far as being released, it's just 3 songs. You know, maybe. I mean, I don't. You know, like I said, this is like pretty much a buyout, so I can't really enable downloads. But I'm sure all you whippersnappers can figure out a way to. I mean, I can do it too.
It's good to know. Thank you so much, Josh.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so I think that about wraps it up for today. It's in the picture. I think. All right.
Chase.
Hello. I think that wraps it up. It's been a huge honor having you talk with all of us today. I know many people were very excited to get to be here to talk to you, and I just like to also thank you for being with us.
No problem. I'm humbled. This is like really nice to be able to talk about this stuff because, you know, it's a rare. I feel like it's a rare opportunity to actually like take stock of where I've been and what I've learned, and you know the kind of stuff. And I'm always kind of like surprised at what questions come out because you know when I was doing this stuff, I was really flying by the seat of my pants. I was like in my 20s when I was doing the Crash music, and it just kind of to me felt like once I was up and running, like once that Hog Wild piece of music, everyone like just started cracking up. I was like, oh, that's what I have to do. I have to make people like smile and laugh at this stuff. And I would just, you know, tank up on a bunch of coffee and like try and like crack people up. but now it's like, you know, here we are almost 20 years later and people still think about it. So I'm just like, oh, okay. You know, I guess there was like a little method to the madness. So it's nice to be able to, you know, kind of go back and figure it all out.
All right. Any closing final thoughts at all? All right.
Josh, thank you so much.
All right.
All
Well,
right.